Jenny had long since stopped replying to my emails. We had both coped with Chris's death in different ways. She decided to withdraw entirely. She drowned her evenings in vodka. First, the top shelf stuff, then the middle shelf stuff. Before she stopped emailing, she'd moved on to the smaller, off-brand bottles, the little wide, flat-shaped ones that cost less than a tenner. Me? I threw myself into the books. Any article on the phenomena that I could find. Anything to make it more clinical, more academic, more distant. Whatever it took to make that swelling glow of that night sea into something more, something less, just something else. The last thing I found, the last thing I emailed to Jen, was an article about phytoplankton. You see, these little buggers, they're packed full of a chemical called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase. Apparently the whitecoats even knew to name this shit after the devil. And when you put them together, boom, light. We'd first heard of them when we arrived in Cambodia. By now, I'd been travelling for 3 months. To be honest, if you've ever sat in a student bar, you've already come across me in my story. I had the scraggly hair, the loose green vest top with a faded emblem of an East Asian beer, and even the little braided friendship bracelet that I would tell people was given to me by one of the children in the village I'd volunteered at. I'd actually bought it from a particularly pushy sales tramp for an absurd fee because she wouldn't leave me alone and I was too polite to tell her to bugger off. I think I'd even once mentioned, out loud and everything, about wanting to find myself, but every new country showed me that, no, I couldn't grow a beard and, yes, I missed playing Mario Kart. The temples were beautiful, the roads were exciting, and the food, that was bloody incredible. But day by day, the dirt and the noise ground me down. I'd been in Hanoi when I first met Chris and Jen, trying to find one of the drinking roads where tiny plastic stools and tables spilled out onto the road and the beer was only 20p, and I'd decided to get good and drunk. Upon arrival, however, it was a far cry from the raucous party street that I was hoping for, and more like a depressing scene from a Vietnamese reimagining of Cheers. All surly locals drinking to their budget with no particular fondness for foreigners. Then I saw them, Chris and Jen. Chris, the 6'3" German hunk with his receding dark hairline, confidently and handsomely shaved down to a bristle, and Jen, his British girlfriend, a short and brunette Geordie with barmaid cuteness and a loud, infectious laugh. He beckoned me over with a wide grin, and I didn't even hesitate to take the offer. We spent the evening swapping stories from our travels and agreed to buddy up for the next leg of the trip. It was to be Cambodia. It was easier to haggle prices on taxis and such in bigger numbers, and so 2 weeks later, we found ourselves in the Cambodian capital. I sometimes wonder what might have happened had we taken that first tuk-tuk that was pushed at us outside our hotel. The one we could hire to drive us around for the day to see all the sights. Possibly it wouldn't have made a difference. But there's always that butterfly effect question of which tiny decision it was that sent us down the path that saw me watch Chris scream into the deep. Had we hired him for the day, maybe we wouldn't have been as tired at the end. Maybe the time we saved would have meant that we would have been able to see the royal palace in all its regal splendor. Maybe our moods would have been lighter by the end of the day and we wouldn't have needed the escape. Maybe we'd have ended up in a different bar, on a different street. Maybe we wouldn't have seen that advert. But we didn't take the tuk-tuk. We decided to walk. We decided to see the TripAdvisor top 2 places, 2 museums, dedicated to the genocidal horrors of Pol Pot's communist regime. We walked to the school that had been converted into a torture chamber, and then we walked for 2 hours to see the killing fields. By the end, we were drained, physically and mentally. The horrors of seeing those sights sunk in further for every step of the 10K journey, only to get compounded by seeing the actual tree they used to execute babies. We were a far way away from that plastic stool where we shared our travel stories. Defeated and humbled, we slunk into a little bar by the side of the Mekong River. God knows what it was. Happy something? There's irony for you. I had reached my absolute limit. I needed a break. Something non-historical. Something non-horrendous. I needed a beach and a cocktail, and to not think about being murdered because my glasses made me look too smart. It was there that I saw the poster on the wall. A laminated copy, faded till it was mostly only the blue ink that survived. A stock photo of a speedboat proudly invited us to visit Koh Sing. Relax on the beaches, snorkel the reefs, swim with the stars in Plankton Bay. Ambitious, I thought, that they thought this shitty flyer would be attracting many celebrities. Still, the boat was a mere $10, and it said we could rent a cabin or camp. We agreed to leave as soon as possible. The boat itself was, let's just say, not the same luxurious speedboat shown in the flyer. Rickety planks of faded red wood split over rusted nail. A makeshift seating area was really nothing more than a few thin foam mattresses, the kind you used to do PE on back in primary school. The foreign tourists laid out. One guy was actually reading Into the Wild, seemingly without irony, with their Kindles and water bottles, while a smattering of locals kept to the back of the boat, though some unspoken and uncomfortable agreement that presumably involved a cheap journey if they were seen and not heard. Luckily, their excitable children paid such backwards customs no heed and gleefully clambered over everything in their football shirts. Still, there was a cooler box of cold local beers for $1 apiece, and perched on the rim of the boat, you could sun your legs and take in the rolling coastline. Upon arrival, though, any fears melted away. It was nothing short of idyllic. Truly, the postcard image of a tropical paradise. Hammocks swung between trees. Strong fruity cocktails were being served. The menu was all burgers and pizzas rather than honey-coated crickets. I was happy to kick back and actually chill out for a bit, but Chris was still chasing his experiences. "When does the Plankton tour begin?" asked Chris, picking at the label on his beer. "Ah, friend, we have to wait until sundown. We will leave about 6 p.m. to take the boat to the open place," replied the guide. "The open place?" "Yes, friend, the open place. It is where they swim." It was barely midday. I spent the next few hours working my way through the cocktail menu. They were sweet and strong and cold. By 4 p.m, I was feeling their effects and decided to ease off a bit. Drunken swimming was not fun. Chris had barely nursed his way through 2 beers and Jen was taking a nap. But eventually, the sun gave way to a beautiful pink sunset, and we were herded onto a small tour boat, maybe big enough for 20 and barely half full. There was us, an old German couple, 2 French backpacking girls, and 3 Australian guys. We set off as the sky darkened. As the pitch black crawled over the water, something slightly magical happened. Slowly, but surely, the foam and spit of the water, it churned up the boat, and it seemed to sparkle. At first, I presumed it was just a trick of the light, some flake of sunlight, caught in a water drop. But the darker it got, the more obvious it was. The sea was literally beaming. The tiny little plankton, disturbed by the boat, were exploding into light. Luciferin was mixing with luciferase, and these tiny specks of nothing danced by their own light. By the time we reached the open place, it was pitch black. The lights atop the boat did nothing to pollute the night, and the stars filled the sky. I'm trying to think of ways to describe that kind of dark, and I just can't. It's that kind of dark that almost seems light again. Light because once the glare and the shine and the reflections and everything else are gone, you can see again. They jumped in, but I didn't. Something about jumping into water I couldn't see the bottom of. Instead, I inched down the coarse metal ladder that was draped over the side of the boat. I'd love to be able to say that I swam and danced and swirled around amongst the specks of joy, appreciating the way that nature danced. But honestly, I didn't do any of that. I pretended to throw fireballs. I'd traveled the world, eaten a snake's heart, and deep down, I was still the same 13-year-old I'd always been. Through all of this, I didn't feel the first sting. Once the novelty of shouting at imaginary characters wore off, I took in the sights of swirling my hands through the water and watched the trailing glow like a hand-sized comet tail that followed my every move. The change was subtle at first. It's weird. You're surprisingly good at detecting little tiny changes in how something moves. My dad loved a story about when he worked on a truck that delivered beer kegs and had to collect the empty ones. His mate, on the deck, was throwing the empty kegs at him to catch. He looked up at the last one thrown and saw just a tiny change in the arc, a minuscule alteration in the flight path. He instinctively moved rather than try to catch it and watched the full keg crack on the concrete. His idiot co-worker grinning at his prank. It was that kind of tiny change. The specks didn't move exactly as they should. There was a fraction of resistance, a slither of independence. I felt the next sting. Back of my hand, down from my ring finger. 2 more stings. Back of the knee, under the armpit. 3 more. Top of the shoulder, inner thigh. All the parts that I would need to swim. The sea was suddenly less dark. The stars, fractionally less easy to see. Deep down, below us, a glow emerged. First green, and then blue. Something deep was stirring. "Back to the boat, now!" was all it took to break the spell. I broke for the ladder. Every time my arm came above the surface of the water, it was speckled with bursts of light. Clinging, biting, burning. The glow below grew and swelled and moved with a singular purpose, a sway left and a dart right, and then a focused expansion. No, not an expansion, a surfacing. I kept pounding my limbs into the water, each splash a burst of light. I closed the mile-long meters as fast as possible and threw myself into the ladder, wrenching myself upwards so hard it took the skin from my water-wrinkled palms. Coughing and spluttering on the deck, pulling and clawing at the still stinging patches of light on my arms, I glanced over the deck. Chris was still in the water. I looked around. Jen had already made it back to the boat. None of the other guests could be seen. Chris held his arms in front of him, but they were barely arms now. The coating of light brought out every detail of Chris's disappearing flesh. Uneven, bumpy holes pocketed his forearms as the glow from the depths swirled up towards him. His shocked eyes looked up from the mess of his flesh and met mine for one last time before the deep glow surged up around him and covered him in one final, blinding wave. With Chris gone, the glow sank down again, back to the depths from which it had come. The light faded, and the stars came back out. The water regained its stillness, and the last few specks of light on my body died, leaving the whole boat in shocked, stunned silence. Through the calm of the night, the music from the beach bar wafted over to us. The waves, too small to be seen, lapped like kittens at the hull. They blamed the disappearances on the day drinking. Just a few more drunk, Western tourists dying of stupidity abroad. Luciferin and luciferase, and something in the deep.